In Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34, we find the fourth words of Christ. The passage reads, "And at the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani,' which means, 'My God, why have you forsaken me?'" This passage is a direct reference to Psalm 22:1, a psalm of David, which carries the exact same words. The main theme of these fourth words is abandonment. This is the only recorded time in the Bible where Jesus does not refer to God as Father. On the cross, Jesus bore the full sin of the world, past, present, and future. And because God could not be in the presence of sin, he had to look away from his son, utterly abandoning him and inflicting all of his wrath upon him. You see, Jesus did not die first and foremost as a martyr to a righteous cause, or even as an innocent man wrongly condemned. He died first and foremost to be a substitute for man, and the Lord had to judge him according to those sins. Don't be mistaken, at this point, Jesus was still the Son of God, just as much as he is now. But the way I like to think of it is, if a son sins against his earthly father, he doesn't lose his kinship with him, but there is something broken there, some sort of fellowship that is broken. And on the cross, Jesus' fellowship and the intimacy he shared with God was broken at that point, and that was something he had shared with the Father for all of eternity. We talk a lot about the physical pain that the cross brings, and it definitely is a great bodily pain to be crucified, but what was much greater than that pain was the pain of being abandoned by the Father, that spiritual anguish that Jesus experienced. So how do we find hope in this passage? On the surface, these last words of Christ are not hopeful ones. They're full of despair. But we have to look at the full context of Psalm 22 in order to see what's going on here. While it is true that David is lamenting in the beginning of the psalm, by the time we get to the end, David assures us that everyone will worship God and the Lord will rule over all the nations. David's story of sorrow and vindication mirror God's redemptive arc in the world. You see, even in the midst of the despair on the cross 2,000 years ago, God's plan was still at play. There was still hope in the promise of God's deliverance, and that there would be resurrection on the other side of death. Jesus was abandoned by God, so we would not have to be. These last words of Christ reflect his utter dependence on the Father, even when he couldn't feel anything but the weight of the sin of the world. We are called to have this same attitude in our own lives, to depend on God, to trust in his love, and to believe that eternal life is offered to us through Jesus Christ, his Son. What a picture of faithfulness and obedience that we can only hope to emulate. You know, it's hard not to draw comparisons to what we're going through right now. We are living in a period of uncertainty and isolation. We're stuck, alone, and unsure of what the future will hold. And it's easy to believe that God has abandoned us, just as Jesus was abandoned on that cross. But the good news is, Jesus experienced isolation, loneliness, and yes, abandonment, so that we never have to. Through his sacrifice, we can experience intimacy and fellowship with God, the God of the universe. What a joy that is. So together, on this Good Friday, let us fully trust in the Lord's plan for our future, looking to the cross and the final words of Christ for inspiration. That is what this day could bring us.